There are so many ways to upcycle tin cans, and since we have so many on our recycling bins, I'm going to grab a few of them and I'm going to get creative. When you're working with tin cans, it's recommended to paint them with either acrylic paint or chalk paint. Latex paint tends to peel and chip easy, so it's best to avoid using it. For our first project, I've taken some paper towel, cut them into strips, and then applying a layer of Mod Podge to the tin can and gently layering that paper towel strip on top of that. After that, I'm adding another layer of Mod Podge of the paper towel strips. This process is going to help create a texture and durable surface on the tin can that can be painted and decorated afterwards to suit any style. Next up, I've prepared a batch of textured paste, and I have a full tutorial on how to make it, which I'll link down below in the description. Using the texture paste, I'm applying a generous layer all over the tin can, covering it completely. After covering the tin can with the textured paste, I'm going to use the end of my paintbrush and make swirls on it for a decorative touch. Once the entire can is covered, I'm going to let it dry completely, and this is going to create a sturdy surface that we can paint later on. I can't wait for this one to dry because it's going to be really unique and one of a kind. For the next tin can, I'm using my air dry clay. I'm going to roll it out onto a flat surface until it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. Then I'm going to use a ruler to cut the clay into strips and squares, giving them the appearance of bricks. To add texture to the clay, I'm going to place a doily on top of it and use the rolling pin to gently roll over it. This is going to create a lovely texture on those clay squares. The air dry clay with the textured effect resembles bricks when it's finished, and it's important to not roll too hard to keep the square's shape and the clay intact. While the air dry clay is still wet, I'm going to apply a small amount of hot glue to the back of each clay square and then evenly space them out onto the surface of the tin can. This is going to create an illusion of a brick wall once the project is complete. To hide the metal rim at the top of the bottom, I'm just going to add some air dry clay around those areas, and then I'm going to set it aside and let it dry completely. For the next tin can, I prepared a batch of my homemade Mod Podge. You can check out that tutorial, the link will be down below in the description. Using paper towel, I've crumpled it up into strips to create a wrinkly texture, and then I'm applying it to the tin can, overlapping it and creating lots of texture. You can also do this technique using napkins or any other type of paper. The possibilities are endless. Now that my tin cans are completely dry, it's time to add some paint. To ensure that they all have an even base, I'm taking them outside and I'm going to give them a coat of my white spray paint. This is just going to give it a uniform look, and you won't see that metal in the inside of the can. Now it's time to paint them. For the brick one, I'm using a terracotta colored paint. For the swirled one, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this one. I'm just going to start layering up different colors and see what inspires me. I've got some brown, I've got some black, I've got some white, and now I'm going to go in with maybe a little bit of that terracotta. And once I had the terracotta on top of it, I thought maybe it would look really beautiful with some turquoise. I love this idea. And then I just added some twine around the top of it. For the textured paper towel one, I'm just painting with some of my white homemade chalk paint, and it's going to give it almost like that stucco look. And for the brick one, I'm just going in and I'm dry brushing just a little bit of white on the top of those bricks. I'm going to sand it a little bit so it gives it a distressed look. I love this one, but if I was to do it again, I would have put the squares closer together. I've got some wooden beads and I'm just adding them as feet on the bottom of these tin cans. Put in some faux plants. If you're going to put in a real plant, make sure you drill a few holes in the bottom. What a great way to upcycle some tin cans. Next tin can upcycle, these are a little bit bigger. These are coffee canisters, and I'm going to take out the bottom. When you're removing the tops or the bottoms out of tin cans, you want to make sure that you have a can opener that's going to smooth down the edges. This one works perfect. Now, you want to make sure that you are putting the seam at the back of your project. I'm fortunate, my husband has a vise out in his garage, so I can squish these together really well. If not, you can just use your hands and maybe a rubber mallet and work away at it. have them all squished, I'm going to drill a hole in the top of each one, making sure that I'm drilling that hole where the seam is, because that's going to be the back. Now I'm going to take them outside and I'm going to give them a coat of my spray primer. While I'm waiting for that primer to dry, I've got a piece of scrap pine and I'm painting it with some of my homemade stain. It's so easy to make. I have a full tutorial. I'll link that down below in the description also. The primer is dry on my tin cans. Now I've sprayed it with primer because it's going to let the paint adhere better. Now I'm painting it with some of my homemade chalk paint, letting it dry, and now I'm going to add some transfers on it. If you're following along here for a while, you know I love my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfers. That's the technique that I'm going to do on these tin cans. Using my Mod Podge mat, I've printed these graphics off on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse the text, and then I'm applying it onto my project, getting all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, and then setting it aside and letting it dry for 24 hours. It's been 24 hours. Now I've dampened it with a little bit of water on a rag, and then I'm taking my fingers and rubbing away the paper. And as we do that, the graphics are going to be left on our project. We're going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. We're now ready to mount these on that piece of pine. I'm centering them exactly where I want them, and then I'm going to screw them onto that piece of wood, fill them up with a little bit of moss, add some faux flowers, and I think this is a really beautiful way to upcycle tin cans, and it's really simple to put together. We're now ready to go on to our next tin can upcycle using some homemade Mod Podge. Again, we're back to the paper towel. I've ripped it into strips, putting it in the homemade Mod Podge and applying it all over that tin can and letting it be really textured. This is now completely dry and I'm painting it with some white chalk paint, and I want to add a base to it. I always save the lids from my tin cans also. So I've got 3 here. I'm stacking them up, gluing them together with my hot glue gun. So it's going to act like a pedestal, and then I'm going to paint it with some of my chalk paint, and then we're going to glue it onto the bottom of this tin can. I've just used some hot glue here. You can also add a little bit of E6000 if you want it to be really secure and not move. And I've created a really cute little pencil and marker and scissor holder for my craft room, just using a tin can and some glass lid jars. This one is really adorable. These are some tuna tin cans. I've painted them with some black spray paint. I've got a spindle from my stash, and I've got some scrapbook paper. Now I want to decoupage with my scrapbooking paper, and you've probably seen me do this before. If you have really thick paper, you can use some packing tape, put it along the back of your scrapbooking paper, tear away that packing tape, and as you do, it's taking away a layer of that paper and making it thinner and easier to decoupage with. And once I have that all removed, I've cut the strips to fit around those tin cans using my Mod Podge. I'm decoupaging them onto them. Now I've got my spindles, I've cut them to size using my E6000. I'm gluing a portion of that spindle into each of these tin cans, and this is what it created, a little tiered shelf that would look beautiful in a primitive kitchen. This tin can upcycle is really simple, but it turns out really pretty. I spray painted my tin can with some white spray paint, let it dry, and then I got out my dollar store twine and I'm just wrapping it around the tin can. I want to add a pretty fringe to this, so I got out my macrame cord and I cut a piece a little bit bigger than the top of the tin can, and then just cut a whole bunch of pieces that were all the same length, that we can do a knot around that first piece of macrame cord, a lark's head knot, and we're going to tie those all along that first piece of macrame cord. Once I cut it down to size, I took my comb and I combed it out so it was nice and fluffy looking, and then we're just going to hot glue it around the top of that tin can. This has a real boho feel to it, and I really like it. Now we're going to add those beads onto the bottom again with a little bit of hot glue. You can also add some E6000 if you want it to really stay put. And if you're really enjoying these tin can upcycles, I'd love for you to hit the like button. It really helps support my channel, and I appreciate all of your support. Okay, another tin can upcycle. I'm going to paint this with some white spray paint and then put on some white chalk paint on top of that. add a graphic using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. This is sat for 24 hours. I'm just rubbing off the paper. You can seal any of these projects up with some polyacrylic sealer also, and it just makes them a little bit more durable, and you can dust them down if you need to. I'm going to add a candle in the middle of this. I picked up these wicks off of Amazon, and I'm just melting an old candle that I had in my stash and pouring it really gently into that tin can. We're going to trim down the wick when it's all completely set. I love making these to set them out in the summer on my patio or on the deck, and it's a really great way to use up extra bits of your candles, and you can customize them. This was a big spaghetti can jar, and I'm going to spray paint it with some black spray paint so it's easy to paint on top of. Now I've painted on my white chalk paint on top of it. It's completely dry, and I'm just going to take the edge of my scissors and just make it look really rustic. I made my own custom napkin. I have a full tutorial on how to custom make your own napkins. I'll put the link below down in the description so you can check that out. And we're going to decoupage it onto this tin can. I like using the water transfer method when I'm using my homemade napkins. Put my napkin on a plastic sleeve, added some Mod Podge on my tin can, pick up that plastic sleeve, apply the napkin, and it's that easy to put a graphic on any of your DIY projects, especially on tin cans. Next tin can project is this one that I've had on a shelf for a while. I love the patina of it. I'm not going to paint it, but I got out my Cricut and I'm cutting some vinyl, and I'm going to add a graphic on it with some permanent vinyl, cleaning up that tin can with a little bit of alcohol before I apply it, wrapping some wire around a pencil to create a handle for the top of that tin can. I just used my drill and I drilled holes in either side of that tin can, applying it. Added some of my junk and crap and bits and pieces. I love this one. My head swirls sometimes with things that I save out of the recycling bin and what I can do with them. At some point, how many tin cans is too many tin cans to save? But as you can see by watching this video, there's so many ideas and so many different designs that you can do on tin cans and incorporate into home decor, or make them for gifts for family or friends, or you can also sell them. Some of these are some of my best sellers when I go to craft sales or craft fairs. This one, I just put some spray adhesive on a stencil, laid it on the tin can, used some of my acrylic paint to stencil on top of it, and it's created this beautiful design. I've got a piece of a spindle. I used my E6000 to glue to the bottom, filled the tin can up with some sand, added some candles. Genius idea for the patio for the summer. Now I've got a big coffee canister. I took it outside, sprayed it with some black spray paint, then I'm going over it with some of my white homemade chalk paint. I printed off this graphic on my laser jet printer using the homemade napkin technique again, which works fantastic with this. It's better to use the homemade napkin technique with the tin cans because there's so many ribs in them, it's hard to rub off the paper. This works the best. Applied it to the tin can with a little bit of Mod Podge. I'm using my X-Acto knife to cut an X in the top of the lid. We are going to seal this up with some engine enamel because this is going to go in my bathroom and I want it to be durable and be able to wipe down. Add some of my garbage bags, pull it through that lid, and this is a really great way to keep all your bags in one place, and it looks pretty. Now this is a different variation of the tin can that I just made with the junk and crap graphic, except this one I smushed. I put in my vise, I pulled the bottom together, printed off just junk and crap, adding it to that, I guess you call it a smashed tin can, centering it, pressing it down really well. I'm going to add a wire hanger on the sides. And this one is really cute to hang in the garden. You can fill it full of some annuals, and it has drainage out the bottom, or I have this hanging on the outside of my shed just with some old bits and pieces in it. Another squished or smashed tin can, and I'm adding some homemade sand paint. The texture that this paint recipe makes is, I love it. I put 2 coats of the sand paint on and then sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer. I made another fringe like what we've made in one of those other previous projects, and I'm just hot gluing it to the bottom of the tin can, adding a faux flower. Has a really nice boho vibe to it. Another smashed tin can and 1 ply of a beautiful floral napkin. We're going to decoupage this onto the tin can. I've painted the tin can with some of my white chalk paint, and then I'm going to add that napkin on top of it. If you use a darker color underneath your napkins, it's going to show through. So I always like to paint my projects with a lighter color and then decoupage on top of that. So I'm just basically taking this napkin, putting on that plastic sleeve, just like we do with our homemade napkins, and then applying it. It just gives it a nicer, smoother finish, and you're not gonna have as many bubbles and wrinkles when you do this technique. And then you just peel away that plastic sleeve. You can take your fingers and you can smooth it out a little bit if you need to, or use a little bit of plastic wrap, and that will help smooth it out. I'm making sure I've got the edges sealed down really well. And then I'm going to do the back of it, applying a little bit of Mod Podge, picking up that napkin, applying it, getting all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, and then we're gonna set it aside and let it dry. Once it's dry, you can go back in with a little piece of sandpaper and sand off any extra napkin that you have hanging off the edges. I had this fringe that I picked up at the thrift store. I love it. It looks great with this napkin. Hot glued it, filled it with some craft supplies. I hope you're not getting tired of these upcycled tin cans, because there's so many ideas that you can do with these that I could keep going on for hours and hours. And even just turning them into planters, there's so many ideas of ways you can decorate them. My husband's a big coffee drinker. We have piles of coffee canisters. So I save as many as I can that I can upcycle. So I have 3 here that I'm going to do. I'm putting them in the vise and I'm squishing them down at the bottom. When you're squishing them, like I said before, make sure you have your seam at the back. Or when you're doing your project, it's going to look kind of funky because you're going to have your seam of the tin can not where it's supposed to be. Now I'm going to take these outside and spray them with the BIM primer. Now let's decoupage some fabric. This is an old tea towel. It had some holes and stains in it, but I'm going to use a portion of it to decoupage on one of these tin cans. Whenever I'm at the thrift store and if I see a piece of fabric that catches my eye, or a tea towel or a pillowcase, I always grab them, and even if they have a little rip or a tear in them, because you can cut them up and you can do a project like this. I'm just adding my Mod Podge onto the tin can and decoupaging on that tea towel. I just cut out a portion that I thought would look the best on that tin can. Once I have it exactly where I want it, I'm going in and I'm putting Mod Podge on top of it. I love the retro feel of this tea towel. I've drilled a hole in the back and I've got a piece of pine that I stained again with my homemade stain. I'm just screwing that tin can into it, filling it up with some moss, putting in some faux flowers. If you wanted to put this outside, you could put in some real flowers and hung it up, and it's just beautiful. And it's what all these pieces are one of a kind because you're using unique items to create these upcycles. We already know this, but upcycling tin cans is so good for the environment because it reduces waste and saves resources. And by using cans with a new purpose, we can help keep them out of the landfills and reduce energy needed to make new things. So when you upcycle, you're not only being creative, you're also helping to protect the planet. So for this upcycle, I had a broken handle off of a shovel. I drilled 2 holes in the back of the tin can. We're going to attach that handle when this is all finished. Making a homemade napkin on my laser jet printer. I'm cutting out the napkin off of that piece of paper that we put through the printer, and we're going to apply it onto that tin can. Using a plastic sleeve, we're going to drizzle a little bit of water onto it, and then I like to, I'm not sure if I showed it in some of the other videos up close or not, but I like to take the edge of my scissors and just go around the edge of that napkin to create a ragged edge. It's when you put it on your project, it just helps it blend in better. Just be really careful. You don't want to rip or tear that napkin as you're removing that edge. We're going to apply that Mod Podge onto the tin can, pick up that plastic sleeve, and attach it on there. Now, it's nice doing this technique, like I said before, because you can get in all of those grooves. You don't have to worry about rubbing off paper if you're doing the reverse technique. Works really well. Peel off that plastic sleeve, let it dry completely, and then you can seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. That saran wrap tip works fantastic for getting any wrinkles and bubbles out also. I'm always dragging home broken shovels, broken rakes, broken pitchforks for projects exactly like this. You can cut the broken pieces off and then reuse them in another project. Now I'm going to turn this one into a planter, but we don't want the dirt to completely fall out the bottom because there is a little bit of an opening after we've smashed them together. I like to put a couple coffee filters in the bottom. That's going to hold the dirt in there, but it's also going to let it drain. Added some spring flowers, and it's a perfect planter for outside of my garden for the spring season. This one's the same concept, different spin, spray painting it with some of my turquoise blue spray paint. I've drilled some holes in the top. I cut this graphic out on my Cricut again, and I'm just applying it, and then I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. Going to put some coffee liner in the bottom again, fill it up with dirt, add a handle with a little bit of wire, and it's another way or another design of using some tin cans or coffee canisters to create beautiful decor for your garden or any season. You can use a design like this and put a fall theme, Christmas theme, Easter theme, so many ideas. When I tell you that I save all of my lids, I save all of my lids. This one's really fun. I can't wait to put this all together because it's going to be adorable. I've painted all of these lids with some primer, spray primer, and then I've painted them all different colors with some of my acrylic paint that I had, and drilled a hole in the top of all of them. And then this is just a tin can that I had. I drilled a hole in the top and holes all around the sides, and primed it and then painted it with some of my homemade white chalk paint. We're gonna put a fun graphic on it. Be grateful, slow down, enjoy life. We're gonna use this one that's reversed with the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer. And I'm gonna make a wind chime. I've printed off the graphic on my LaserJet printer on just regular computer paper, and I'm using my Mod Podge mat. And we're going to put it on the jar, let it sit and dry, and then rub off the paper, and we'll have a graphic on our wind chime. While we're waiting for my graphic to dry, I'm going to put a hanger on the top. I'm just taking some twine, pulling it right through, and then I'm going to tie a knot, probably a couple knots actually, to keep that twine in the jar. Pull it through, and then decide how long you want it to hang down. And then I'm just going to tie a loop in the top. So we have a loop to hang it from. Trim off the extra. And we've got a hanger. I've got some of my thinner twine. I'm going to put this through the hole in each of these little lids, tie a knot so it'll stay on, and then I'm going to do them all different random lengths, so when they're hanging from our wind chime, they all hang at different spots on the wind chime. I've tied on all my lids, and now I'm just going to wet the paper and rub it off so we're left with graphics. I distressed the lids a little bit with a little bit of sandpaper. I think it just kind of gave them that really nice rustic look. The colors are all fantastic. I love how colorful it is. My graphic's all done. I distressed the tin can some too. I'm gonna take some jute and put some jute on the top and the bottom with the hot glue, and it'll be finished. It's all done, and I thought it was gonna be easier to put it all together and then give it a really good coat of this engine enamel to seal it up really well. I'm not gonna have this right out in the elements, but I'm gonna hang it up underneath a porch, so it's not going to get wet or snow or anything at all the time, but I do want to seal it really well. I'm going to hang it up and give this a really good spray, and it'll be all finished. This might be one of my favorite upcycles that I've done in a while. I love it. I love the little colorful, whimsical look of it. So easy to put together, and I love using up free stuff from the recycling bin. These little mesh containers, I've had them forever. I think I actually picked them up at the dollar store. I just don't like the way that they look. So I'm going to upgrade them with these tin cans. I cleaned the tin cans all up, and these are the tin cans that you can't cut the bottom out, so it's going to be perfect for this project. It's going to replace those mesh cans that I had. I'm using some scrapbooking paper that I love. I'm going to cut it so it's the same width as my tin can. Scrapbooking paper, when you're decoupaging it, can be kind of difficult because it's thick. I'm going to show you a little trick to make it easier. I got out my packing tape, and I'm going to put packing tape all along the back of that piece of scrapbooking paper, putting it from one end to the other, pressing it down really well. I've got a credit card. I'm making sure that tape is pressed firmly right into that scrapbooking paper. And then I'm going to peel away that tape. And see what it's doing? It's removing some of that thickness of the paper and making it easier to decoupage with. Be really careful, really slow, but this is so satisfying to pull that paper off, and by the time we're finished, it's going to be almost as thin as a napkin, perfect to decoupage with. Now it's ready to be applied onto the tin can. Using my Mod Podge mat, I'm going to apply some of that onto the tin can first, and then place on my piece of scrapbooking paper. I like doing this in sections because you're gonna get not as many bubbles and wrinkles. I'm gonna apply it, push it down, apply it on the top, push it down until it's covered the tin can completely. Once I was finished with the two cans, I set them aside and let them dry completely until the next day. Now I want to drill a hole in the top so I can hang it onto my craft room pegboard. Making sure you're drilling your hole so the seam is at the same place where you drill your hole. And I think this is way prettier than those little mesh containers. We are upcycling tin cans today. And this is the first step, a tin can. I've taken this outside and I've spray painted it with some spray paint primer. And I also drilled a couple holes in the top. And this is really easy to drill some holes. I just have a block of wood that I use, my drill. You can pick out what size hole you want. And I just put my tin can, I've already done this, but I'll just show you. I put my tin can, because you don't want to drill into your table. Put the tin can here and then just drill into the block of wood. It creates a hole, and then go the other side, and it's quite easy. And then just drill down, and then you've got your two holes in the tin can. That's some paper underneath here because we are going to paint our tin can. Make sure you stick around because we are going to do a graphic transfer on fabric that is fantastic. So I'm going to just put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint on the tin can, and it paints on really easy after you've sprayed your tin can with that primer. It's not going to peel or chip. I mean, you don't have to put the chalk paint on. You can just do a couple coats of the spray paint and it looks really nice too. I just like the look of that chalk paint, that matte finish and kind of that grainy finish that it gives. So that's why I'm painting on the chalk paint. Really simple, but if you're just painting your tin can just with chalk paint without using the spray paint primer, It will adhere, but it's not perfect. It sometimes will have a tendency to chip and peel a little bit. So that's why I always like to add the spray paint on top. And you can see it coats really nice, this homemade chalk paint. And then we're going to, just so we can speed this process up, I'm going to get my heat gun and we're going to dry this really quickly. You have to be careful when you're using the heat gun with the tin cans because it will heat up the tin can and it gets really hot when you're hanging onto it. So just be careful, don't have it on a really high setting when you're doing this. This is going to have a little bit of a primitive twist to it. And I've got my cinnamon. I'm going to use some Mod Podge matte. We're just going to put a coat of Mod Podge all over that tin can. Okay, so I've got the Mod Podge. Before it dries, we don't want to let this dry. Now we're going to take the cinnamon, and this smells fabulous. We're going to sprinkle it all in that wet Mod Podge. This, you've probably, if you've been following along, you've seen me do this technique with dirt, and the dirt works really great also. But I just wanted to show you a different way that you can achieve that old vintage rusty look, and cinnamon does the trick. And again, this isn't going to take very long to dry. Keep moving it around or your hand's going to get hot in the inside of that tin can. Hang tight, because as soon as I get this done, we're going to do an image transfer that's really cool. My Mod Podge. And now you just want to go over everything and seal it all in. If you're not sealing it with some Mod Podge, you can also use some polyacrylic sealer. If you're not sealing it, then it's going to be really difficult to dust after, and you're going to have this cinnamon kind of flaking off on it. So just use your Mod Podge and seal it all up. Okay, so we've got this all sealed really well. Make sure we're getting right up to the rim. And we're going to set this aside now and let it dry. If you saw my video yesterday, I used some of this material and I did some graphic transfers. Really easy, really fun, and you can transfer onto fabric. So I've got a piece here, and this is just like, you want to use something that's absorbent. You don't want a shiny fabric. This is like a muslin, I think, or it's like a cotton blend, because you want the Mod Podge when we're putting the graphic on with the Mod Podge, it needs to soak into the fabric. If you're using a fabric that's not going to allow that, then the transfer is not going to work. This is one that I've already finished. It's already dried, but I'm going to show you how I do it. So we're going to use the Mod Podge matte. Now this is a graphic printed on regular computer paper with my laser printer. It will work with an inkjet printer. You'll just find that when you're rubbing it off, the lettering is going to be a little bit lighter. It's not going to be as crisp. It will work, but I like using my laser printer for this project. Now you want to put quite a bit on because it's got to soak into that fabric. So, and go right to the edge, applying it right all the way to the edge. This is a little bit more Mod Podge than what we would use if we were doing the graphic transfers on our sign, because like I said before, you want that to soak into the fabric, where the wood, you just want it to soak into that layer of chalk paint. So you don't need quite as much. So that looks about right. Now we're just going to, now I've put this in my graphic program. I use Google Docs to size it to fit this piece of fabric. So, oh, the other thing is I've put it in, I've sized it, and you also want to make sure that you're reversing your text, because if you don't, when you put this on, your letters are going to be backwards. Okay, and then we're just going to center it on our fabric and really press it in. You want to get that Mod Podge soaked right into that fabric. And then comes the hard part, setting this aside and not touching it. You want to let this completely thoroughly dry. Now this one I made yesterday, so it sat overnight and it's ready to go. You can't really rush this. If you try to do it too soon, then you're not going to get a good transfer. So you got to let it really dry really well. This is just a little rag, a little bit of water, and I like to start in the middle. You just want to wet this so it just starts to show through. This is basically the same technique as doing it on the wooden signs, except we're doing it on fabric. And you can see, you don't need to rub really hard, just a light hand, and you can see the paper is rolling up and coming off. We're going to get the Mod Podge and we're going to put a coat over the whole piece right out to the edges because we don't want that fabric to fray anymore. So if we get the Mod Podge right out to the edges of it, it won't fray. So now we're going to set this aside, let it dry. We want it to lay flat. We don't want it to curl up very much. Love it. And we've saved a tin can out of the recycling bin. Okay, we're just going to just glue a little fabric edge around the top of this. I think that'll look nice. This is just a scrap piece of fabric, again, that I just picked up at the a thrift store. I actually think it was a bed sheet, a great big huge bed sheet. And I love the ticking look of it. So I cut it up into strips for ribbon, and I've been using it on projects for a long time. And then I can just kind of tuck this down. I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue around the inside, working quick so it doesn't dry on me. Press it down. There, and I think that just kind of gives it a nice finished look. Okay, I've also got a piece of wire that I'm going to put a little handle on this, and this is just a piece of old scrap wire. I have such a stash of all this kind of stuff that I never get rid of. That's great for projects just like this. And now I've got the holes that I drilled right at the beginning, so I can feed this through and then put the other one over on this side. And just adding these little extra touches, it just takes it away from just looking like a tin can. Adding a little handle or adding a little fabric. So now we have a nice little handle on our tin can, like that. Oh. We're going to now coat the back of this with Mod Podge. And now we're just going to put this on. And because we use that Mod Podge right out to the edge, it's going to keep that frayed edge look. So now what I would do with this, because I think we're pretty much finished, you can just, I have a little bit of faux greenery and you can add it in the top. And what do you guys think? Okay, so I've got 3 tin cans that we're going to work on today. I like to spray my tin cans with primer first before I paint them. It just allows the paint to adhere better. So this tin can right here has 1 coat of BIM primer on it. And then this one I did the same thing. And then I put a coat of my homemade black chalk paint on this one. It's dry, it's ready for its next coat. And this one I did some baking soda paint on it. Sprayed the primer and then did baking soda paint. And it gives a really nice texture than just a flat white. So that's what I'm going to do on this one. I think we're going to do, let's do the black one first. Black chalk paint. This is kind of the same thing that I did on my glass jars last week, is this technique for this one. I'm going to do it kind of primitive style. I have drilled 2 holes in the top because I'm going to put a little hanger on it when we're finished. I first am going to coffee stain a piece of paper. This is a really simple way to coffee stain paper if you want to do it quickly. I've just got instant coffee and warm water and a little sponge. Just gonna sponge it all over the paper. And you can see, you want it everywhere. You just want it to look really grungy and primitive looking. Just let it drip wherever. And I don't need to cover the whole piece of paper because I'm going to print just in the middle of it. So that's all there is to that for coffee staining. I just take my heat gun and just lightly dry it, and it dries really quickly. And you have a piece of coffee stained paper that you don't need to worry about turning your oven on and drying it. This is a really quick way of doing it. I have one that's already ready. This is one that's already finished, and I am going to just cut it down or rip it down to size to fit on my tin can. So just rip the paper with the ruler, and it just gives a really nice jagged edge. Instead of just cutting it with the scissors, it gives it more of a primitive look. Save these. You can use them in your junk journaling, your mixed media. Aren't they pretty? And so don't throw these away. You can use them on another project. Ink and my dabber, and just go around the edges and just kind of blend it in a little bit. Mod Podge. Love my Mod Podge mat. If I can get it open. Actually, a little trick to this is putting on some Vaseline or putting some saran wrap around your lid before you put your lid on. And I didn't do that the last time I used it, so that's why it's a little bit sticky. And I'm just gonna put some Mod Podge on the top of this graphic. I did this technique when I did my glass jars last week, and I like the way that it looks when I put it on my projects, when it has that coat of Mod Podge already on the top. And if you, this was printed on my LaserJet printer, but if you are using a inkjet printer, I would seal this with some hairspray first so your ink doesn't run. And then I'm just gonna dry this with my heat gun. Just takes a second, doesn't take very long. Okay, so this is almost dry, and you can see how it looks so much better on that coffee stained paper. And then the Mod Podge on top. Okay, so that's dry. Now we're going to use the black tin can. How's that? For a tin can out of the recycling bin. Now I will mention, if you're following along, you see me do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method lots. It's really difficult to do on a tin can because you have all these ribs, and then you've got to rub all of your paper off in between them. So whenever I'm doing tin cans, I kind of avoid that method because it is tricky. So we are now going to put some Mod Podge on the back. Got Mod Podge on there. Now I've got the 2 holes drilled, and I've got a seam here in the back. So I want to make sure we're putting it on our tin can so it's centered. And that looks pretty good there. And I'm just going to rub it and press it in right into those ribs. All these graphics that I'm using today are available in my Etsy store. You can grab them if you're interested in crafting with them. And I actually just started a new graphic club. If any of you are interested, I have a Patreon account that you can get any new graphics that I am listing in my Etsy store for $6.99 a month. You're going to be guaranteed to get 20 graphics, and they will be delivered right into your inbox. You can download them on your computer, and you can print them off and use them for any of your crafting projects. So sign up on Patreon. It's $6.99 a month. You're guaranteed to get 20 graphics, and all of these graphics are new graphics that have just gone into my Etsy store. And there's going to be ephemera, there's going to be motivational quotes, there's going to be photos, it's going to be a little bit of anything. I create them all myself, so it's kind of whatever I feel like creating is what ends up in the shop, but they're always beautiful. If you're interested in that, I pinned a link up at the top of my chat here. You can check it out. It works out to, if you're buying a graphic in my store, they're $2.50 a piece. If you join the membership, it's 35 cents a piece. So you're saving so much money. And I am all about crafting affordably, not having to spend a whole bunch of money. So if I can make these graphics and share them with you guys and you not have to pay a whole bunch of money for them,
that's my main goal. So anyways, if you're interested, no pressure, you can check that out and sign up if you're interested. Let's do some grunging up of this one. I got some paper to put underneath this because it's going to get a bit messy. And we're going to put some Mod Podge on. If you watched last week when I did my glass jars, I did this same technique. I just love the way that they turn out. Okay, I got this all covered in Mod Podge. Let's get my container of dirt. This is dirt and sand and whatever was in my garden last fall. We're still frozen here, so I can't get some dirt. So this is stuff that I saved from before. And you can see already, isn't this so neat? It's such a primitive looking way to upcycle these tin cans. And when you're all finished, I mean, it's still a tin can, but it definitely looks a farmhouse and primitive. Okay, we're gonna clean this up a little bit. Get my dirt out of the way. I'm gonna get my heat gun. We're gonna just dry this a little bit. And I have lots of, I'll turn this off for a second. I have lots of tutorials on how to size your graphics for your projects. So anytime you're looking for a technique and you can't find them, just send me a message and I can send you the link, because everything that I do on my channel, I have a tutorial of how I did it to guide you along. My can opener, when I open them, it doesn't leave a sharp edge on it. So you want to make sure you're picking up a can opener that has that. Otherwise, you're going to have to be really careful you don't have a sharp edge on the inside. Now, next step, I am just going to brush on Mod Podge to seal this up. And that's going to seal in all that grubbiness. And I don't need to go over that graphic because I've already sealed it up with Mod Podge. So I can just go around it and seal all this up. Mod Podge is my favorite crafting tool. Oh my goodness, there's so many things that you can do with Mod Podge. You can make homemade Mod Podge too, but it's not quite as versatile as the store-bought one. The homemade Mod Podge, it doesn't work to do graphic transfers. It works fine to decoupage with, but not transfers. So you still kind of have to have the real thing to do that technique. Okay, so this is sealed. We're going to set this aside and let that dry, and I'm going to go on to my next tin can. A tin can that I have primed. And if it's cold outside here and it's rainy today, I would have sprayed the inside too, because it just finishes it off nicer, but it was too cold today to do that, so I just did the outside. I've got some baking soda paint and a little sponge, and I'm just sponging this on. I like doing this on the tin cans because it just takes away from that tin can look. So this one is one that I finished with the baking soda paint, so you can see how it kind of just gives a nicer texture. And I'm just dabbing this on over the whole tin can. And I love to sponge this on. Gets in all those little ribs. You can use, well, I've mixed up the baking soda paint, but you can also just use chalk paint too. That creates a really nice texture also. I'm going to set that aside and let it dry. And we're going to work on this one that's already done. How to make homemade napkins. It's basically 1 ply of napkin, and then I've taken some double-sided tape, put it on a piece of computer paper, and then put it through my laser jet printer. You can use an inkjet, but you probably will want to seal it up with some hairspray before you decoupage it, because the ink may run on you. So it is possible, but just know that you probably should use a little bit of hairspray to seal it up if you're using an inkjet. Here's my homemade napkin. How simple is that? I like doing the water transfer method with these. So you're gonna take your homemade napkin, and this is just a piece of plastic. You can use a plastic sleeve, just save plastic from anything will work. Put it face down on your piece of paper, or your piece of plastic. This is just water and a little sponge. And you just want to sponge it onto your napkin. And until the napkin is all wet. You don't want it soaking wet, and it's really fragile. So you want to be really careful. Okay, now you can see that my napkin's completely wet. Now what I like to do, I like to take the edge of my scissors and just roughen up the edge, because what that's going to do is it's going to help it blend into your project better and not look like you've just stuck a hunk of napkin on your project. Just gives a ragged edge and lets it blend in. Edge of the scissors work perfect. Just be really careful because it's delicate. Right here, we're going to just ragged it edge. I like doing this technique because it's forgiving. So when you go to put it on your project, you can actually lift it up and move it and replace it. Opposed to if you're just decoupaging, once you put that graphic on your project, it's there. You're not moving it. With this technique, you can move it a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to, put a little bit of Mod Podge where I want. There's always a seam on these tin cans, so you want to make sure that you're putting your seam at the back. So I'm just going to put some Mod Podge on my tin can. You don't need very much. It doesn't need to be thick. And actually, if you put too much on, it just kind of gets mucky on you. So that's probably enough. Now, this is what I love about this technique. You can pick this plastic sleeve up, place it where you want. If it's not really where you want it, you can lift it up and move it. Okay. I love this coffee graphic. That looks pretty good. And then you can just press it down so it goes right into the tin can. And then you just lift away that plastic sleeve, and you can just gently take your finger. Be really careful because it's really fragile. Just get any bubbles and wrinkles out. Isn't that such a, I love the look of this. It's rustic, and you could put little spoons in this and put it at a coffee bar. That's that for putting that graphic on. It looks pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna set that aside and let it dry. Thought I would do with this one, because I drilled some holes in the top. I have a piece of wire, and I'm gonna just string this through here. String it through the other side. If I can see what I'm doing here. There we go. We got a hanger. And we kind of want it, you don't want it perfect. This is primitive. You want it to be kind of crooked and bendy. Bendy, is that a word? I don't know if bendy's a word. So there we go. I've got that on. And I think what you can even do, I don't know if I can do this now it's on, but you can take like a paintbrush and you can kind of swirl it. See what I mean? That's a tin can, guys. So it just needs to dry a little bit because you can still see the Mod Podge, but it's going to dry clear. But so many ideas. You can put a little faux flower in it and set it up in the kitchen on a shelf. So many possibilities. Now let's get this one. This is the coffee one. I want to finish this off. I have the matte clear polyacrylic spray. I love this as a top coat. So I would take this outside and I would give it a really good coat with this matte clear and seal it all up. But I want to put some feet on the bottom of this tin can. So I have just some wooden beads. I'm just going to take, now I probably should use some E6000. I'm just going to use my hot glue gun because we're on live here. But I would probably put a little bit of E6000 in with this too. But you can just glue them on the bottom. I'm going to use 3, I think. And these wooden beads I just grab off of Amazon. Or another great way of looking for beads, go to the jewelry section at Value Village, look through the jewelry. A lot of the jewelry from the 70s and the 80s were the big gaudy beads. And you can take that jewelry apart and use it in other DIY projects, and you'd be surprised at the beads that you can get out of them. Okay, so this is just another way of kicking up the tin can look with a setup. So now, I know you guys can't really see, but now we've got little feet on the bottom of our tin can, and you can put, again, like a faux flower in it, and it looks great. And display it somewhere on your coffee bar or in your kitchen. Great way to upcycle a tin can. Okay, now we have this one, and it's still really wet. So let's see if we can get this dry, because I am going to use this graphic, which I absolutely love. This one's in my Etsy store. Real kind of vintage looking bee. We're going to decoupage this on. Now that was printed on my inkjet printer. So I'm going to show you how you can decoupage with an inkjet print and not have it smear or rub off. And it's a really simple, easy trick to do that. Okay, this is my butterfly graphic that I have printed on my inkjet printer. If you are going to decoupage with an inkjet print, it has the possibility of running or smearing, and there's not really anything you can do about that other than sealing it up before you decoupage with it. So what I do, I've printed this off, and I get some hairspray, and you're just going to take your hairspray and just spray that graphic completely. I like using even the extra firm, because then you know that it's got a real sticky hold to it. Spray it and then let it dry. Yes, it is a bee. Massage car seat. Exactly. That's what they are. If you're in the thrift store, look for those, because you can take them apart, and I'm telling you, you'll have so many beads you won't know what to do with them. They, yeah. So check to see if you ever find those. And then you just want to dry this, because what that hairspray is doing is it's sealing in that ink from the inkjet printer. You can also put the inkjet print in the oven on the lowest setting for 10 or 15 minutes. That will help set the ink a little bit too. Every printer is different. Every inkjet printer is a little bit different, so you don't know how it's going to react until you try it. Mine's pretty good. So, okay, now this is almost dry. Now, another little trick, another thing you can do, flip it over, because that ink comes through on the back side too. So it won't hurt to even seal it up a little bit on the back. And because you don't want to go to all this effort making a project and then putting your inkjet print on something and then it runs. So we want to seal it up the best. And you can also use this to seal it up also. This is a little bit more expensive though, and I find that I get just as good a results with the hairspray as I do the polyacrylic spray. And we're just going to dry this. And that's pretty good. So this is sealed up. So now what I like to do, this is a lot of steps, but trust me, it's worth it. Mod Podge. Now you're going to see when I put this on, it's not smearing. It's stuck. It is good to go. I like putting the Mod Podge on top before I put it on my project, but you can fool around with different techniques and see what works for you. But this is what I like to do. You don't need very much, just a light coat. This is a really pretty graphic for spring. And it's in my Etsy store. And like I was saying at the beginning of the live, I have my new Patreon membership where you can get all of these graphics, the new graphics that I'm listing in my Etsy store every month, guaranteed 20 of them, sent right to your inbox for $6.99. You're going to get 20, probably more. They're sent twice a month. That works out to 35 cents a piece, opposed to $2.50. So something to look into if you're going to be crafting a lot and you like my graphics. Now we're just going to cut this out. Just along the edges. If you had some decorative scissors, you could even use some decorative scissors to cut them out, to cut this out. Actually, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I might use my decorative scissors. What have I got here? Oh, this is a nice one. Maybe I'm just going to use just do a nice, yeah, that's nice. Just to give it a little bit of a different looking edge. That's nice. I actually found all of these decorative scissors at the thrift store. There was a whole bag of them. I think there was like 10 or 12 pairs of these scissors for $5.99. So I grabbed a whole bag. That's great. And just trim around just a little bit around the edges here. That's a nice thing about any of these DIYs is I always just go by the seat of my pants. I never know what I'm creating until it's finished. And I'm like, yep, okay, it's done. This Mod Podge is just a little bit still sticky, so that's why these scissors aren't cutting very well. And then we can just put it, I'm going to find that seam. This one doesn't have a seam. How the heck does it not have a seam on here? Okay. Anyways, I was going to show you guys. I'm going to put a plant in this one outside on my patio this summer. So I drilled 2 holes in the bottom for drainage to put a real plant in it. And another thing that I like to do, if I'm going to put a real plant in it, coffee filter. Throw it in, put it in the bottom of your can, and then put your dirt in. So then when you water it, you're not going to lose your dirt through the hole. It's going to keep it in and let it drain properly. So that's a little trick to do. And then we're going to get our Mod Podge, put some on the back, and cover it right to the ends. We're going to, where's this going to look the nicest? I think right here. And we're just going to press this down. This kind of has like a shabby chic look to it. I like it. Press it right into the ribs of that tin can. And something else that you can do to give it a little bit more of a rustic look. That looks really great. Oh, I love this graphic. You want to press that so it gets right into the ribs so it's glued down really well. So what you can do now, if you want to take it to that next level, is take your scissors again on the edge and you can just kind of scrape away at the paint. And it just kind of, not a lot, but see how it just kind of gives that distressed look? I like the look of that with the graphic. What do you guys think? Yeah. And you can just kind of go around with the edge of your scissors. You don't want to do too much, but just enough to give it just a kind of a cool look. It's got the holes drilled in the bottom to put a plant. I got these little faux plants that I can show you, but look at that. Isn't that adorable? 3 tin can upcycles out of the recycling bin that were going into the garbage, and we upcycled them.